welcome back to Base Paths and Brewskis. This is episode 3, and today I'll be going through my starting pitcher projection for 2024 opening day and what I think that the rotation will look like, at least going into, the end of March, early April. Really excited to do this episode. This is the first part of a 4-part series that'll go through my predictions for all the position groups. So let's get into it. Today's BP, got sitting next to me here, is the Poppy Root Beer. Kind of like the Olipop I had in the last episode. It is supposed to be a lower sugar prebiotic soda, higher in fiber. Um, Generally just supposed to be a little bit healthier option for soda. So I'll get to compare this to the Olipop one I had yesterday and maybe pick which one I'd like going forward. That's good. So here's the rotation I went with. This is kind of based off, my prior knowledge, what I've heard from the offseason, looking through fan graphs. It is led off by obviously or the ace fastball Freddie, right-hand pitcher, and Wade Miley was next. Old horse, old goat, whatever they're calling him. Solid lefty, which I'll kind of get into a little more later about how this might not exactly be what the rotation looks like to start the year, barring some shoulder soreness in his throwing shoulder. So we can talk about that in a little bit. But Jacob Junis was the next guy I had. I think that we went out and got him for a reason. I think he's a really solid pitcher with a lot of upside, and I'm excited to talk about him. And kind of the same thing with the next guy I have here, who's a left-hander, DL Hall. I think the Brewers have been really adamant about him being a starter. They want to realize his potential a little bit and let him get the innings he deserves and needs to develop a little more. And then I ended it with Colin Ray. I think that this spot has a lot of openings, but I thought this was more of the most comfortable option to go with. That was kind of how I looked at this pick, but let's dive in a little deeper to who I picked for these spots. So obviously I'm gonna kind of tier out how I made these picks. So first pick, Freddie Peralta obviously is the ace. He had a great 2023, 165 innings, 210 strikeouts, 54 walks, 3.86 ERA, 1.12 WHIP, and then a looks like a 1.12 ERA plus. If I'm ready, if I'm incorrect about that one, I'm sorry, my handwriting's not great. And he had a 3.0 FWAR, which I mean, he was really kind of had it coming out at some points in the season, and he's such a solid pitcher with such a good fastball. One of the better fastballs in the game, which is surprising based on its 56th percentile velo. I mean, kind of a, middle of the road in terms of how hard he's throwing, but I mean, his whiff and K percentage was a 92nd percentile. He's making guys miss with an off speed and breaking of a combined -1 run value. So I mean, it is his fastball that's working, but that run value I will kind of also add that was down from his 2022 numbers. He had much better stuff in 2022. Didn't have to rely as heavily on the fastball, but I mean, he is fastball Freddy. That's what you're going to get from him. And the thing that I think is so interesting, and I've kind of heard and I researched a little more into it, is how his extension is just so elite. I want to say it's like 88th or 92nd percentile extension in the league. And basically what that is it's how far you are from the pitcher's mound when you actually release the ball. So Freddie Peralta is not, your typical 6'5", 210-pound starting pitcher whose, arms touch his knees. Uh, he's a little more compact of a dude, and I think with that high extension number at 6.9 feet just shows how strong his legs are and how reliant he is on being more of a balanced pitcher. What I mean by that is someone who can use the strength in their legs to balance and get lower when they're going to push off the mound. So it takes a lot more precise movement than maybe some of these other guys, maybe like your Chris Sale, who's a little more upright with just kind of a different arm angle. So I think Freddie, that's the thing that I think really separates him. I'm super excited to see his 2024, and I think he's a dark horse Cy Young candidate kind of guy for the NL. I mean, I'm super excited to watch, and obviously as a Brewers fan, you're happy that he'll be with us for the next few years here. So just wanted to go through to wrap up Freddie his Zips projections. So had him at 157 innings, 10 and 9, which record to me is kind of an outdated stat. 179 for strikeouts, 58 walks. I thought that number was pretty low. At least the strikeout number, and the walks were elevated a bit. I guess relative to his last season, they were the same. But he also had a 3.86 ERA, which was the same as the season last year. So I don't know if Zips was just kind of getting a little lazy or what was going on. Um, I also had Baseball Reference predict his WHIP at a 113, pretty similar to last year. And then a 2.9 WAR, which again is kind of on par for last year. So I mean, I think he's going to turn a corner and be a really solid pitcher, and I hope that he is able to build off that extension and that fastball and really start applying his breaking stuff and off speed stuff that had been there in years prior. So let's move on here. My next little category here is the solid category. I don't think this is meant to be, a slight on Wade Miley at all, just by calling him solid, but I think that's kind of what he is he's a guy who you know what you're gonna get. 36-year-old left-hander, and he can go out there and shove some innings for you. Last year, 120 innings, 9-4 record, so decent there. 3.14 ERA, a 4.69 FIP, which I mean that's not fantastic considering, 4 is pretty average, and once you kind of get towards that 5 range, you're starting to look at a guy who's, starting to teeter towards that below average replacement level guy. 1.1 WAR, also a 46.3% ground ball percentage, which I mean that's the kind of guy you're gonna get with him is he's not gonna pitch to strike you out, but he will be a soft contact, get ground balls. And I think that's what has helped him play for so long. I mean, he's like the old goat, or I don't know exactly what the nickname was for him, but I did want to note, kind of like I mentioned earlier, he is going through some throwing shoulder soreness in camp right now and is kind of 50-50 to be on the opening day roster. So I think that could open up some spots for some guys that I'm going to dive into a little bit later. But I mean, with Wade Miley, we got him for 8.5 million. I think that's solid as a guy who's gonna go in there and be able to start, you know, 20, 25 starts for you, 120 some innings. Zips had his projection very similar to his year he just had. ERA was about 1 point higher, so curious what that's about, possibly due to his high FIP, which they also projected at 4.83, which is declining. Not a great track, but still a 1.1 WAR. That's an okay player. Definitely not a guy who I'd want to have as my second pitcher in the rotation. I think he's much better as a fourth or fifth guy, or potentially even just long reliever spot start guy. So considering he's our second guy is a little worrisome, but I think there's a lot of guys that have potential, and I'd like to kind of get into some of those guys now. So this category was you cracked it, now go. And what I mean by that is these are some guys that I think can crack the team, and they all kind of have different situations. But you crack the team, now it's time to go. Now it's time to prove yourself and prove why you will be staying on the squad and in the rotation and fend off some of these guys I'll talk about a little later in our next category. So first, let's talk about Jacob Junis. I think out of these three, he's the biggest lock to make the rotation. Um, Last year, 86 innings. He only started 4 games out of his 40 appearances. I thought that was something good to note, that he would kind of be stepping back into a starting role again. A 3.87 ERA, 0.7 WAR, 3.74 FIP. He also had about 10 strikeouts per nine and 2.2 walks per nine. It's pretty good. I just wanted to go into his Zips right away. He was projected this year to go 21 starts in his 31 appearances, so I think that's going to be mostly starts. I don't think there's going to be many relief appearances. I think he's going to, unless they come up with some kind of, opener a type plan. I'm curious to see what they do with that. I'm sure that all depends on matchup, but about 143 innings, which is, I mean, that's nearing double his work from last year, so it would be stepping up, and I think getting some more value from him, getting him some good experience. A 4.26 ERA, a 4.20 FIP, not bad. 2.1 WAR. I think that if he improves his fastball a little bit, it is at the 93.7 miles an hour, which in today's game is not, anything to, really glance at again. It's pretty relatively slow. I mean, obviously compared to what I'd throw, it's pretty incredible. But I think he needs to either work on some of his other stuff. He already has a good chase and whiff and K rate, so I mean, if he can keep that going and also limit his walks, if he improves that fastball a little bit and maybe learn from Freddie Peralta on what is helping him so much, I think that he'll be able to find himself a little bit and maybe get his career resurged here going in Milwaukee. Very excited about Jacob Junis though. Next guy I'd like to talk about is DL Hall, obviously acquired in the Corbin Burnes trade. DL Hall, breaking news, will not be Corbin Burnes this year. He is not going to be that kind of pitcher in the starting rotation, and I mean he is the opposite as he is a left-hander, so a little bit different in that regard anyway. 2023, he only pitched 19 innings in the big leagues, 0 starts, 18 relief appearances. Excuse me. 10 and almost 11 Ks per 9, which is pretty solid. 3.26 ERA, 3.0 FIP, which that was, pretty good. It is a limited workload, but it's pretty good in a .4 WAR. His AAA numbers were pretty elite. He had just kind of jumping off the page a bit, almost 13K per 9, and I believe he was used as a starter at that point in AAA, so obviously he has the stuff to do it. He his ZiPS projection was almost 100 innings, about half of his appearances being starts. I think it's going to be a little more than that because I really believe that the Brewers organization and Pat Murphy will want to get him in that starter role as soon as possible and let him just get some innings under his belt, build some confidence, make some mistakes, grow from that. I think that's kind of the direction they want to take with him. I mean, it seems like that's kind of what they did with, Sal Frelick, threw him into the fire a little bit, had him batting 3 for a while, high in the order, and I mean, his debut series was pretty fantastic, and I mean, his debut game was awesome, and that's what happens when you can give these guys a shot. A 3.89 ERA, a 3.98 FIP, and a 1.5 WAR, along with around 12K per 9 is kind of what he was looking at on the ZiPS too. And I'd be super happy with those numbers. I mean, that's pretty good, especially for a guy who's kind of gonna have to step into a role as a starter. It's not something he's had to do like this before. The one note I really wanted to talk about with him is that I don't want his situation to become a Keston Hiura. He on Baseball Savant, he's one of those red hot guys. Stuff's good. He limits, hard contact. He's got good strikeout stuff. But that's a lot at AAA. I mean, if he can carry this over into the major leagues, that's great, but you don't want to turn him into one of those 4A guys, kind of like we talk about with Keston Hiura, who dominate AAA and then kind of come up to the major leagues and maybe the lights are a little too bright for him. So that's kind of what we're hoping to avoid with him. He's only 25 years old. He's not a free agent until 2030, so a ton of team control. And I mean, that's what you have to demand back for a guy like Corbin Burnes. And like I said earlier, he's a lefty. I mean, that's something if you can get young, controllable starting pitching, especially left-handers, and kind of develop them to be the guy you want to be, that's doesn't get much better than that. So I'm wishing DL Hall the best of luck, and I can't wait to see what he does. I haven't really seen his spring training numbers yet. Just for reference, it's like March 4th when I'm recording this, so I can't think of his spring training numbers off the top of my head. I haven't really written them down, but I really hope that, he's doing good. And I've heard that his bullpen's looking good, so I'm excited to see him. The last guy to round out the order, I almost thought about making his own tier as kind of a placeholder guy, but I think that he can be more than that, and that's Colin Ray. Um, Kind of wanted to be a little more brief about him. His His spring training is going decent. However, I do want to talk about a cool feature on Baseball Reference is the opponent quality. So if you look at his spring training statistics and the opponent quality he's facing, I think it was around a 6.4, 6.8, something like that. And I mean, that's like lower than double A level opponents. So, you know, take that for what you will with how he's doing in spring training. But I mean, a positive is a positive. His 2023, he had 124 innings, 4.55 ERA, 4.9 FIP, point 0.8 WAR. Decent. I mean, a guy who again should be a fourth, fifth, or maybe spot starter, long reliever type guy. And we had him starting last year, and he did a good job filling in for maybe a situation where he didn't think he would be in that important of a spot in the rotation, but I think he did good enough. And I mean, he's kind of a filler guy, an experienced or reliable guy, kind of a Wade Miley, but maybe not as consistent or as solid. He had a walk percentage in the 65th percentile. I mean, that kind of relates back to his reliability. He's not gonna just give up base runners freely. So, I mean, if he can keep that up, that's something that'll keep him throwing innings in the majors, whether that be in the rotation or in the bullpen. His baseball savant, they're not a big fan of him. A lot of blues. Nothing really special popping off the page about him besides, his walk numbers. So not much more to say about Colin Ray. I'd like to see him pitch good, obviously, if he's gonna have a Brewer cap on and maybe bring, some of that heat he has in spring training into the regular season. And I think that'll help us starting in April, maybe try and get us a little hot start with some consistency on the mound. All right, I'm gonna take a little drink break. Hmm. All right, let's talk about the quick call-ups, spot guys. Generally, just some starting pitching in the organization I wanted to mention. Joe Ross, I think he has a good shot at cracking the rotation as well. Him and Colin Ray definitely fighting for that, right-hander spot in the rotation. I'm going to talk more about him in the bullpen episode, so I'm kind of going to skip him for now. I heard an interview with him on Brewers All Access with Dom Catronio on WTMJ, and he seems like a super nice guy, super down to earth. Very seems to kind of know where his spot is in the organization, and he seems very motivated to play well and bounce back. I don't believe he's pitched in the major leagues since 2021. So he's kind of had some injury setbacks, and obviously I'm really hoping the best for him. But he's a guy who I think could be in the rotation, barring Wade Miley not being able to play opening day or be on the opening day roster. So I think that's something to note as well. Next guy I wanted to talk about was Jansen Junk, and these are in no order, no particular order. There's different things that excite me about each guy, but Jansen Junk, 2023, didn't pitch I didn't really have much for him in the majors. Don't know if he did make an appearance or not, but his AAA numbers were okay. 140 innings, low strikeouts, uh, 4.18 ERA, 4.58 FIP. I mean, not too great considering it's AAA numbers, but his ZiPS projection for this year was like 39 innings, two starts out of maybe 30 some appearances, a 4.59 ERA, similar kind of to his AAA numbers with a 4.77 FIP, point 0.1 WAR. Not great numbers. Similar to like a Colin Ray as well. Um, he doesn't get hit too hard, so that's obviously a plus if you're not giving up, hard hits, if you're not giving up barrels, exit velocity is obviously going to be great. But a five pitch guy, I think he can turn into a starter, but I don't see him projecting much more outside of being a long reliever spot starter guy, kind of what ZiPS said as well. I think that was a pretty accurate projection. Next guy I wanted to talk about was Aaron Ashby, left-hander. He's been with the team for a little bit now. Um, he's actually signed through 2027 with team options through 2029. So he'll be with us for a while, and obviously under control relatively to the team. 2023 obviously didn't pitch due to injury. His ZiPS projection for this year was just short of 90 innings with around 10K per nine, 10 starts and 50 some appearances, 4.08 ERA, a 4.24 FIP, and like a .7 WAR. I think that's kind of a little low on him. I think they want to explore what he can be as a player. He has a 78th percentile velocity on his fastball. He's been pretty consistent in his time in the big leagues, and obviously they felt the need to extend him. They've invested in him. The 5 year, $20.5 million contract. That's 4.1, excuse me, $1 million AAV. A good lefty. Gets a lot of ground balls, limits the hard hits, strikes people out, and whiffs are all, they're above the 70th percentile on the Baseball Savant from 2022. And I think they obviously just want to explore more what he can be as a good left-hander in the rotation. Um, Maybe step in for Miley at some point this year once I'm sure, will, have some wear and tear, and just, who knows what happens with his play. Could be declining, but I like Aaron Ashby and I want to see him succeed. It sucked not seeing him last year, but I hope he makes the roster opening day. I personally will see, I kind of see him starting down in AAA and then potentially being called up early on. I'd say probably before the All-Star break. I mean, the Brewers make a lot of organizational moves. They like to plug and play different guys, test things out, move people around. And I think that's a theme we'll see in the infield as well this year, but I also think we'll see in the rotation. The last guy I wanted to discuss today was Robert Gasser. Uh, Probably the most exciting out of these four guys. Left-hander, um, good stuff. He's got some pretty good stuff in AAA. 166 strikeouts to only 50 walks. It's pretty good in 135 innings, a 1.28 whip. He started 25 of his 26 appearances. I mean, this dude I think is almost there, almost ready to pitch at the show. I think he was a non-roster invitee to spring training, so there would have to be a roster move to get him on the opening day team, but so that's why I don't think that'll happen. But I think that kind of like with Aaron Ashby, there will be a point at some time this year, whether it's September or whether it's earlier, that Robert Gasser will get to pitch some major league innings and hopefully make a difference while doing that. Wanted to note that with his spring statistics, he has 3 innings pitched so far with a 6.0 ERA, a 1.67 whip. So kind of like I said, I see him more as starting in AAA, potentially even staying the whole year there this year, really fine-tuning his stuff before he comes up and starts using up some of that service time. So I think if he can keep that strikeout stuff, continue to work on lowering walks and just limiting runs in general, I think he's definitely going to be a guy that can be an impact pitcher for us at the major league level. So that's really exciting, that we have him coming up as well on a team that doesn't have a ton of starting pitching prospects, but there is a guy that I didn't mention, Jacob Mizorowski, who I'd like to get out a video on kind of what I would do if I was just running the organization. So that'll come after this 4-part series on my opening day projection. But in that episode, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the top prospects who might not be on the opening day roster, or, might even have a bleak shot of playing at all in the majors in 2024. And Jacob Mizorowski is kind of one of those guys that fell into that category. And he's a guy I'm super excited to talk about, but I won't today, sadly. Now with a little Brewers trivia for you. So at the deadline in 2008, CC Sabathia was traded to the Brewers, where he started 17 games with the crew. How many of his 17 starts were complete games? Answer choices are A, 0, B, 3, C, 7, or D, 11. And if you were paying attention to last episode's trivia, the answer was over 13.6 was the actual projected fWAR for the Brewers infield in 2024, including the catcher. So shout out to our guest host, Dominic Lanfear, for guessing that correctly. He guessed over, and it ended up being 1.6 fWAR over. So shout out to him. If you guys want to go follow him on any socials. I shouted him out on the Base Paths and Brewskis social media accounts a couple times. Probably will continue, and he'll probably be a recurring guest. So hope you liked him. He did a great job. As always, a B&B beer request. You have any beers you've been dying to try? Or do you have a go-to beer that I need to try? Comment or reach out on any of the socials listed below with what I should drink next. One last reminder, today's drink was a poppy root beer. It's for a healthy gut, is how they sell it. It is a prebiotic soda, high in fiber, low in sugar, delicious. And just like that, the beer is gone and the pod is done. Thank you all. Have a good one.